Texas is having a complete break with reality, the government in Texas, and a huge chunk of the population of that state. They really are. They're going goddamn insane. Let me give you an example. According to the New York Times, every morning, little kids in Texas, school kids, recite an oath to their state. That includes these words, quote, "I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God." End quote. Little kids are being forced to do this. And now there's a whole bunch of proposed measures in the Texas legislature that could soon become law, and it would promote even greater loyalty to Texas in that state's classrooms and public spaces. Because what's happening, Republican lawmakers, the Christian fascists in the Texas legislature, are trying to obliterate Texas history and rewrite it to play down, if not eliminate, references to slavery and anti-Mexican discrimination, all of which is part of that state's founding. Don't forget, Texas used to be part of Mexico, as did much of the U.S. Southwest, until we took it, right? Now, the proposals in Texas, according to the New York Times, and by the way, that's a state that influences school curricula around the country because of its huge textbook market. If textbook publishers, when they come up with a new edition of say, a history textbook, they first present it to Texas. I'm talking about national history. They present it to the politicians in Texas to see if it passes their scrutiny. If it does, then it goes to publication. If it doesn't, then the publishers will withhold publication and try to mollify these Christian fascists in Texas. And then the rest of the country gets the, benefit of the Christian fascist editing. But what's going now in Texas amounts to some of the most aggressive efforts to control, change the teaching of American history. And it's not just Texas. This is coming, according to the Times, as nearly a dozen other Republican Christian fascist-led states try to ban or limit how the role of slavery and the pervasive effects of racism can be taught. This is exactly what Winston Smith did in the novel 1984, to eliminate historical truth, eliminate it, make it go away. Who controls the present controls the past. Who controls the past controls the future. It's very simple. Idaho was the first state to sign into law a measure there that would withhold funding from schools that teach such lessons. And lawmakers in Louisiana, New Hampshire, and Tennessee have introduced bills that would ban teaching about the legacies of slavery and segregation, or that any state in the country is inherently racist or sexist. It's to be eliminated. Good Christ. A historian at the University of Houston, who in fact specializes in the history of the American West, his name is Raul Ramos. He said, quote, "The idea that history is a project that's decided in the political arena is a recipe for disaster." Well, end quote. It is, Professor Ramos, but it's also a time-tested recipe for Christian fascists. This is how they do it. In fact, this is how all three Abrahamic religions do it. Eliminate the scientific origins of the history of the human race. Eliminate it. And replace it with monstrous mockery bullshit. This is not new. what makes this so insidious now is that these Christian fascists are going from state to state to eliminate the teaching of real history of the United States. Pretty soon, it's going to come to the point where there never were any Native Americans. They didn't exist. When the white European settlers got here, this was a land devoid of human beings. There was nothing here but wolves and buffalo. That's it. And as far as slavery, what's slavery? The only black people that came here came as tourists. They wanted to get out of the heat and humidity of Africa and come to this green, verdant country, the United States, right? And when they got here, they all decided to cluster mostly in the southeastern part of the United States and work out in them cotton fields. Yes, sir. That's the truth, as the Christian fascists want our children to believe. Jesus. Now, this is coming as this Christian fascist-controlled legislature and the session in Texas that's going on right now keep pumping out all this bullshit, from a whole bunch of new voting restrictions to a ban on abortion, and now they want to eliminate the historical past and replace it with Christian fascist bullshit. And these Christian fascist activists are watching this closely in other states. But what is happening in Texas is alarming educators and historians and activists who said that the legislature is ignoring the role of slavery in the campaigns of anti-Mexican violence, and as a result would fail to educate a whole generation of students growing up in a state that is undergoing these huge demographic shifts. These are the white people saying, we have to strike now, goddammit, now! We have to make sure that the history books tell lies, just like we tell you, just like the orange vomit tells the nation from his perch atop a mountain of rancid cheeseburgers down in Mar-a-Lago. We have got to control everything that these little Mexican and colored children are going to read here in Texas. We can't let them know the truth. One measure that recently passed, according to the New York Times, in the Texas House, along party lines, would limit, i.e., eliminate, teacher-led discussions of current events. It would prohibit course credit for political activism or lobbying, which could include students who volunteer for civil rights groups. It would also ban teaching of the so-called 1619 Project, that initiative by the New York Times that says it aims to reframe U.S. history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the center of the national narrative, which is where it belongs. But in Texas, if you teach that now, we'll put your ass in jail. Now, it's not law yet, but it's passed the Texas House. And this bill, the one I'm talking about now, would also limit how teachers in Texas classrooms are allowed to discuss the ways in which racism influenced the legal system in the state. Which, I mean, let's face it, Texas has been a segregationist shithole since before it was a state. And the bill would ban teaching of the state's succession from Mexico in 1836 by men who were actively fighting to expand slavery. And that would come under the heading of promoting patriotic education. Oh my God. And a third bill, according to Times, would block exhibits at the Alamo complex in San Antonio from explaining that major figures in the Texas Revolution were slave owners. God damn. And Mr. Raul Ramos, the historian, questioned how that so-called Texas Revolution, that was a 6-month rebellion that concluded in the spring of 1836, how that could be associated with patriotism and freedom when the state's new constitution that was written back then explicitly legalized slavery 7 years after Mexico had abolished it. Oh, well, I mean, come on, Malloy. That's done very easily. Mr. Ramos asked, quote, how do you have freedom when you have slavery? And he added that the values extant in 1836 would have enslaved African Americans in perpetuity, end quote, had they not been changed. So this arguing over the proposed legislation is in fact testing the limits of so-called Texas exceptionalism, with some people there questioning whether a sense of pride, this Texas bullshit, I'm from Texas, should mean glossing over some of the state's most egregious, violent, vicious, racist chapters. And the proposed laws also have stirred ideological battles, according to Times, over everything from the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, with Texas Republicans, by the way, voting down a proposal that would have required schools to teach about that insurrection, all the way to the immigration status of the white American enslavers who settled illegally in what was then northern Mexico before they decided to go up against Santa Anna and steal northern Mexico. A Republican legislator from the Houston suburbs, when he introduced the bill banning the teaching that the United States is defined by racism, this Christian fascist named Steve Toth, appropriate, said, quote, do you want our Texas kids to be taught that the system of government in the United States and Texas is nothing but a cover-up for white supremacy, end quote? Well, you ignorant son of a bitch, that's exactly what it is. Exactly what it is. Exactly what it's always been. Read the fucking Constitution, Steve Toth, and then take a look at a number of the framers, of the signers of the Constitution. Start with Jefferson, who allegedly wrote most of it. A slaver, an enslavement owner, a man who owned people, a man who had sex with his black female slaves and fathered children. What do you call that, Steve Toth, you Christian fascist piece of waste? Oh, my God. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.